shape.
And I am filming.
So,
And we're going. Yep. So,
all right.
welcome back to this episode of to be named podcast. Maybe still the Thundercast.
Thunder Featherkist.
Thunderfast or
Thunderfast. No.
Pod Feather.
Lightning comes before thunder.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe we just call it the Thundercast in this university.
And if
who even knows about that university?
If they want to sue us, we'll drop it.
Who knows who they are?
You know what? Don't even sue us. Just say, guys, this isn't cool.
Or we could do a collaboration. And
we could have the dual Thundercast.
Yeah, Thundercast. You could be 1.0. We'll be A.
Yeah, I like it. Thundercast A.
We can also... We'll workshop the name. So for those of you that are just catching this episode that are wondering what the heck we're talking about, in the last episode, Nate told me that the name Thundercast already exists. And we've been using it for 6 episodes so far, or 5 episodes at that point.
Yeah.
So we don't know what we're going to do with the name of this, but for now it's Thundercast. We'll
keep it a Thundercast until further notice.
Maybe we'll talk about it today after we talk about caffeine, because we promised you guys last episode we would start talking this episode about caffeine, because it is, like, again, we are not experts. We're not dietitians, but we have our own experience, and I know a lot of neurodivergent people, and I can talk to the kind of experiences of them. And I am a professional in this field. I tell people I have ADHD professionally. It's what I do because of my TikTok and everything. So I am constantly researching this stuff, and I will share in a little bit an interesting study that I read about caffeine.
Yeah, and that's great. And it's interesting for me because I am in the camp of caffeine is a drug, right? Mm-hmm. Should be used accordingly.
Yes.
It's very recreational in society.
Most people, right? Yeah. Most people use it recreationally.
But while probably for the past 25 years, I have been you should only be you should only be intaking caffeine medically.
Sure. Yeah.
Kind of the last 2 or 3 years, I have come to maybe understand more that people are using it as self-medication for certain things and such.
It is medically, but it's just self-medically rather than,
Right. And so it's interesting to me. So I will give my spiel on caffeine, especially I make fun of people who have alcohol in the evenings and caffeine in the morning. It feels like you have found your way to make yourself tired and then to forget that you were tired. But what's really interesting about caffeine, and we can talk about alcohol too, because it's equally fascinating as a drug.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
So caffeine, we think of it as an energy thing. You put it on a muscle and it'll twitch, Yeah. But mentally, caffeine literally just makes you forget you're tired.
Yes, yeah. It has nothing to do with energy. It's literally that caffeine is the same shape as adenosine, and it fits the adenosine receptors, and adenosine is what make you feel tired. So you can't take that adenosine in, so you don't feel tired.
Yeah. And so that's fascinating in and of itself. It takes 24 hours to stop going off of caffeine. So once you've taken in caffeine, you get, I think, this you'll want to fact check, but I think it's about an hour of efficacy where it is blocking that. But you go through with withdrawal symptoms for 24 hours.
Okay, yeah.
So the next morning, if you have woken up and had caffeine the day before and had some maybe till noon or whatever, and then you're like, well, I don't want to have it. I want to be jittery at night. So you stop. When you wake up the next morning, the tired that you feel is also caffeine withdrawal.
Interesting, yeah. Because that is a symptom of the withdrawal.
Yeah. Is that exhaustion.
So it kind of self-perpetuates.
Like many drugs do, right?
Yeah, totally.
But But the thing is, when it's ADHD...
Yeah, we take caffeine for a different reason.
Right.
It's not the energy thing. And the energy thing is actually weird with ADHD because often it won't give you energy if you have ADHD. In fact, a lot of people find out that they have ADHD because they can drink caffeine and go right to sleep, which is really interesting. That's one of the ways that I found out.
Yeah.
And actually talking about my caffeine use, which I didn't use caffeine until I was about 23, and then used it heavily and then went to the doctor and he's like, hey, guess what? You have ADHD. So I use caffeine a lot. Sometimes more than I should, but it's the problems I encounter with caffeine is that it will affect me differently. And it's probably because there are a lot of different factors going on that I'm just not aware of biochemically. Sometimes it'll be perfect. It'll elevate my mood. It'll help me concentrate. And that's usually why people drink caffeine that have ADHD. It's not for the tiredness aspect or the energy aspect. It's for the dopamine aspect because it heightens the amount of, I don't know if it's dopamine receptors or dopamine on its own. I don't know why, but more dopamine is getting into your system if you have caffeine. And that's something that is connected with ADHD. And in fact, we're still studying that. We don't know if it's that we have less overall dopamine, if we have less receptors for dopamine, or if we have the same amount of receptors and same amount of dopamine, but for some reason our system uses it inefficiently. We don't know.
Interesting.
We're still studying that. And there's a lot of good studies out there that have shown evidence on all sides of that. But we do know that dopamine is a really interesting chemical because what people think it is the pleasure chemical, like the reward chemical. You do something, you get dopamine. You're like, good job. It's actually completely false.
Right. They're debunking that left and right now.
Dopamine has nothing to do with the pleasure that you experience in doing an activity and everything with the motivation to do an activity or the motivation to push you away from an activity. So there's actually, it's called motivational salience. And that is the amount that you are drawn to, like the amount that you are able to motivate yourself essentially to do an activity. And there's this really famous experiment with mice or rats where they could somehow measure the amount of happiness or pleasure that the rats felt while they ate food. I don't know how,
they
the sounds they made, something in their brain.
It's terrible.
They knew how much pleasure they experienced. And so they figured that if they took the dopamine out or they blocked the dopamine in some rats, they wouldn't feel the same amount of pleasure while they ate food. So they tried that and they found that they actually still completely felt the same amount of pleasure when they ate the food. But the ones that didn't have dopamine didn't eat the food. They weren't motivated to eat it. But when they did eat it, or when they got to that point where they were given food, they felt the same amount of pleasure. It was just dopamine literally is the doing chemical, the motivation chemical. So that's why people with ADHD experience executive dysfunction so often because, and this was crazy for me when I learned about executive dysfunction because I thought I was being lazy. What I didn't know is that laziness is, I could do this thing right now, I just don't really want to. Which is the opposite of executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction is there's nothing else I want to do more than this thing. I want to do this thing so bad and it is impossible. I don't know why I can't do it. And it's probably because the dopamine, there are issues with that. And so caffeine is one of the things that really helps you have dopamine. And it's actually one of 5 things that helps neurodivergent people get dopamine. And it's usually stimulants, right? Which is why amphetamines and amphetamine salts, Adderall and Ritalin, those are used for ADHD. If something is new or novel. So if something is very new to you, that will often give dopamine. It doesn't everybody. But you have to remember that if an activity or something gives you dopamine, it's going to be extra effective for people with ADHD.
Which is probably where the idea of squirrel comes from, right?
And it's not that it's I noticed that squirrel. It's is that squirrel going to give me some dopamine because I need a shred of dopamine here?
Something new.
Something new. So there's the stimulants, something new, something you really enjoy. Right? So if you personally have just a real enjoyment of something, you're interested in it, it's much more likely you're going to be able to do it when you have ADHD. Now, unfortunately, we're not always interested in the things that we need to do. Other people are just I'd rather not do this, but I'm going to get it done. It's unpleasant. For people with ADHD, it's this is psychologically painful for me to accomplish this thing because I'm pushing through. It's like trudging through the mud. And I don't even get the reward that comes after that. So new novel, stimulant, if you like it, or if there's a deadline.
Oh.
So if you have a deadline, a firm, hard deadline with like no second chances, immediately, if you have ADHD, you can kick into gear.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting one. And what a lot of people who don't know that, what they end up doing, like bosses and stuff, they say, oh, my employee has ADHD. I need to be forgiving of this. Get that to me whenever you can, which is the wrong thing to say.
Which is terrible.
And so there are things that you should do to be more accommodating of your employee. That's just not one of them. Now you should make it clear, like, hey, I'm doing this because I read about this. I am going to put a firm deadline. Let's work together to decide what that deadline is. That's an important thing. Not just like, you always have to obey my deadlines, but like, let's work together to find a realistic dedeadline and put it together, but this is the deadline. Let's both agree on it. Yeah. It can be extremely effective for people with ADHD.
Which is really interesting to me. So I work with a remarkable amount of people with ADHD. Yeah. And one of those areas is in writing and creating music.
Okay, yeah.
I personally love music, create lots of music, but my passion is in writing stories and lyrics and things like that. So to free up time, I've hired other people in my life who are to write music and to produce music things for me. Two of these gentlemen, and I don't have their permission to talk about them, so I won't say who they are, but which is something I try to be sensitive of. As what I'm most neurotypical about is having ADHD or something like that. To me, I'm like, well, just tell everybody. Yeah. But not everybody feels that way.
Totally, yeah.
Like, in my mind, I'm like, well, just let everybody know. But so this is me not telling everybody. But these two gentlemen, one of them writes music for me and one of them produces music for me. Yeah. And initially I was like, well, we have 6 months to get this done. So you'll need to get a little bit done at a time, but I don't need it till those 6 months.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
Guess when it's not going to happen? Very end, right before the deadline.
Well, and that was the thing is, like, we got to the deadline and I got everything he could do in the time that, from the point that the motivation hit in to that deadline. But there was no way he could do 6 months of work in those last 2 weeks. Right? Yeah. And so I started working with him, and it ended up taking us 3 years instead of 6 months to get this stuff done. But that part of that, what we had to figure out is I had to say, okay, you have one thing, and can you get it done this week? Yeah. You can't get it done. Can you get it done by the end of next week? Yes? Okay. Yep. That's when we need it. If we get it, great. If we got close and nothing was happening, I'd just mention, hey, this deadline this week's still going to happen. Yeah. And if we missed it, if I gave it a week, as in kind of, well, you missed it, sorry. Yeah. And then said, okay, I need it now. How soon can you get it to me? That got us through. I mean, it took us probably 2 years to figure out that system.
But that was the system. That was
the system. I personally wanted to just say, hey, you have 6 months. If you can get it done early, great. Yeah. That'll be helpful to me, but I need all of it by then. But with him, I had to say, okay, 2 weeks. Yeah. It's not done. Yep. I'm not going to talk to you for a week. Yeah. And then, hey, I really need that done now. Totally, yeah. How quickly can you get that to me? And the great thing was most of the time he nailed those deadlines. Sure. And it was never early, but the deadlines definitely got it. And it was interesting because then when the gentleman who writes the music, he's not diagnosed ADHD. Sure. He and I both believe he has ADHD. Yeah. Right.
We could talk about diagnosis and self-diagnosis in a later episode. Right. It's a worthwhile conversation.
The other one has actually been struggling in several ways because of he's been diagnosed and he's had medications go haywire and all these things. So with him, I basically just took this formula and we got the first draft perfect. I gave him the feedback. The final draft didn't happen. I got busy, but when I came back to him, I was like, you know what? I still need this.
Yeah.
How soon can you get it to me? And he got it to me.
Cool.
And so you have to understand, this is a lot of work on my part as hey, this is what I need, go do it type of person. But it is really interesting to me the deadline thing.
Deadline is a thing, and it's because of it's just one of those things that unlocks dopamine, and it's easy to look at that as a moral failing, like, oh, this person's organized, they get stuff done on time, this person doesn't. But we're literally talking about a neurotransmitter present in one person and absent in another person, the main neurotransmitter of doing things.
Motivation.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if you were missing a muscle for jumping and everybody was supposed to jump, but you only got that muscle sometimes under certain situations and circumstances. And so it's important to think of those things. And something I do want to say is I thought it was really cool that you guys had the kind of relationship that you could develop deadlines together, because this is something big for neurodivergent people and ADHD people and autistic people especially. Reactance is what they call it. And everybody deals with reactance, every single person. But people with ADHD just experience it a lot more, and autistic people as well. It's when...
Yeah, define reactance.
So you're going to do something.
Okay.
You're fully set on doing it. You want to do it. You have all the plans to do it and all the motivation to do it. Somebody says, hey, you need to do that thing. And you go, I will never do it now. I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. I literally can't do it because you told me I had to. And it's like, it's not that I don't like you. It's not that I don't respect you. It's not that I don't.
And it's not even that you're like mad that they're treating you
not at all.
Or something.
It's just that because you told me I had to do it, I'm not going to do it anymore. And that's something you have to work to get over, because at the end of the day, you got to do the stuff you got to do.
Sure.
But reactance, and there's different names for it as well, but it's just a much bigger reaction inside of us. And it might stem from the fact that we're constantly telling ourselves that in our head. So that when somebody else says it, we're like, I know, I say that to myself 80 times a day. You know what I mean? But it can be really, really, really difficult. But it is something that can improve with time, especially when you reflect on the fact that, like, okay, this person doesn't know how my brain works and they're not trying to victimize me. They're just telling me what needs to be done. Also, if you're in a relationship with somebody, you should probably tell them about your reactance, because it will be much more effective if they change the way that they ask things, instead of saying, you need to do that, or like, hey, just wondering, no pressure. Tell me about this thing and how it's going right now. Then you're like, oh no, I am getting it done. I just have this going on. That communication can be really helpful in those situations.
And that's huge. If you're a person like me who really gets to that point of just saying, well, this is exactly what needs to happen for what we both want to happen.
Totally.
So you have to do this. And the idea that moment is what could make it not happen.
Yes,
is
wild.
Really hard.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But I also read this thing about autistic people specifically. It's the structure that they thrive under, but it's structure that they choose or have a hand in, or that they, it's structure that they have agency over, rather than structure that is pushed upon them. If you push structure upon them, they will respond very poorly. If they're allowed to create the structure or participate in or consent to the structure, then it will be a whole different experience. So it's not the structure that's the problem.
That is fascinating to me, because we're getting into happiness theory now.
Okay, yeah.
So there was another book. What was it called? It'll come to me in a second. But it was basically a study on happiness.
Okay.
And Punished by Rewards is the name of the book.
Okay. Punished
by Rewards. And so this researcher, if you read the book, understand you are reading a research paper that has been changed so that it's a pretty good read.
Okay.
But there were times where I was slogging through.
Okay, yeah.
Because it was just like results and
dance.
Not a lot of stories told. But what was fascinating about it, and this book was early 2000s, before a lot of the happiness literature that's come out, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But what his research found is what he called the 3 C's are what make you happy.
Uh-huh.
And we'll go with the 3 C's because they're a little more memorable. But the first one was community.
Sure. Yeah.
Having people you care about and people who care about you.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us, that's family. For a lot of us, it's the family that we gain.
Sure.
That we pick through our friends that become like family.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to see if that dog barking.
Yeah. Is that somebody
if we can hear that? That's the UPS guy.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. I wonder how much it'll come through the.
Yeah, it probably
the
won't
mics.
come through much.
You don't think so?
We'll be interested to see. In fact, I could probably see.
Oh, well.
Well, and with that, you stop. Oh no, it's definitely coming.
Okay. Well, we just had a third member of the podcast.
Yeah. That is my dog. He does not like it when people approach our house, and then walk away.
Yeah. Apparently.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, so we'll go on a tangent with the dog real quick as long as he's barking. So my dog is the perfect dog if you want a guard dog.
Yeah.
Because he will bark at everybody, whether he knows them or not. Like you come to our door, you have violated the code that he has set forth.
That's funny.
And he barks. And the biggest thing I have to do is get him to stop moving so I can open the door so that people aren't scared of him.
Yeah.
When he runs out barking at them.
Yes.
Because as soon as he goes out, all he wants to do is sniff you, bark at you some more, because he doesn't know how not to bark. But then you come in the house and he's just like, you're fine, whatever.
It's just the barking has to happen. It's part of the ritual.
And the funny thing about him, so funny story, my oldest son and his friends knew that the dog always barked at them. But they also know that he's never bitten anyone.
Yeah.
And they decided they wanted to test this. So one of his friends dressed up in this scary mask. It was Halloween time, so he had like a Frankenstein type mask or something. But it looked pretty intimidating. And my dog mainly doesn't like men. He's pretty okay with women.
Sure. Okay.
I don't even know how you can tell, but he all the time. But he always can tell. And this friend, with my son's blessing, decided that they were going to run after him in the mask, yelling at him to see what he would do.
Oh, no.
And so they did that. Opened the door, yelled at him, and he span and barked and yelled and barked. Totally left him alone. But that friend has never been forgiven by the dog. Once he sniffed him, took the mask off, all that happened. My dog gives him the worst looks. Like, he's fine with him. He'll bark at him, let him in. He will not come to him. He won't let him pet him.
Wow.
He has never forgiven it. But anyway.
So your dog experienced the reactance against this friend.
he no longer... but we were talking about the 3 C's of happiness from this book. So community, first one.
Yeah.
Family for a lot of people. Our close friends for sure.
Sure, yeah.
And it's why people who are isolated from the world often struggle to be happy.
Yes, yeah.
We can get into introverts and extroverts and how you gain energy and things like that. But even introverts have that community that they need. Right. Second C was choice.
Oh.
And...
So autonomy.
But it was even the idea of not that I have to choose everything I do, but that I got to choose something about what I did.
Yes. Okay.
So like, you have to go pay your mortgage this month.
Yeah.
I am happier if I can choose what day of the month I'm paying it on.
Okay.
If I can choose, am I pulling this through an ACH draft or am I sending you a check?
Okay.
The fact that I have to do it isn't what makes me unhappy. It's if I have to do it and have no options.
Sure. In the way that somebody else is telling me.
Yeah. which is exactly what you were talking about.
So all humans have this naturally. It just seems like it's magnified in neurodivergent people.
But for what you're talking about, and the third C, we'll go there real quick. The third C is content, and it's the idea of having purpose in what I'm doing.
Yeah, cool.
If I feel like what I'm doing is meaningless, that takes away from my happiness. If I can feel like I'm helping somebody or doing something greater than myself with what I'm doing, even if I'm sweeping the street, if I know that people will appreciate the street more, that gives me purpose.
Cool. Okay.
Right. But so what you're talking about, whereas not having choice would make me unhappy that I'd have to write this check every month, and I'd do it and I'd send it on the 1st, and I hate it because I'd rather send it on the 7th because that just feels better. Right?
Sure.
Regardless of what it actually means financially, for what you're talking about is it's not that it makes me unhappy as much as it makes me unable.
Yes. And usually often angry.
Yeah.
there's usually anger that goes into it. And what the anger is like, anger is usually never a primary emotion. It's usually always a secondary emotion. Anger is usually always following something. And usually people are angry because they're afraid. People are angry because they're insulted. People are, and you're insulted because maybe you feel self-conscious.
Yeah, quick acting tip, never be angry. Be something else.
Yeah, be afraid.
That is causing the anger.
Yeah, be afraid, be jealous, be...
Yeah. The person who comes on stage because they're angry is acting. The person who comes on stage because they are hurting is being real.
Yeah, that's real. That's real anger.
Yeah.
Could you feel it?
Right. And it's amazing how different it is.
So different.
When you're angry versus angry, because anger, it's not
nobody's ever angry because they're angry. They're angry because, they're afraid or they're self-conscious or something.
Right.
They're hurt.
But anyway, continue.
But yeah, no, and I was just going to say, that happiness theory does work into it in that way, I guess. It's like, again, you're telling yourself all day what you need to do. Because nobody, if you're neurotypical, you severely underestimate the amount neurodivergent people are screaming at themselves inside their own heads to just get up, get off the couch, do the thing, send the email, stop forgetting your keys, stop forgetting people's birthdays, all of those things. So that when somebody says it on the outside, as if you haven't been just screaming at yourself all day, and it makes you feel like they think you're dumb, or they think you're lazy, or they think you're an idiot, or they think that you don't care about something that you deeply care about. It can often create those emotions, which then manifest as anger. So again, in any relationship, I advise people to first recognize if that's something happening in you, because reactance does happen in everyone. Again, it's usually to a greater degree in neurodivergent people, but most people deal with this. And a lot of times parents are familiar with this because children will deal with this very often. So all of us go through that when we're learning how to do things. But anyway, reactance is one of those things that just is a huge part of the neurodivergent experience. But it is something that you can get better at, especially when you realize the person's not telling me this because they hate me or they think I'm dumb. They're just saying the reality of what needs to happen, and you can come together and find a way through it. I think we're over time for this episode today.
Okay, so what's our conclusion, our summary of this one?
Well, we talked about caffeine, we talked about dopamine. I do want to give a little interesting tidbit about caffeine we didn't get to in the next episode that has to do with a different issue that I want to talk about that I've been researching.
Oh, interesting.
But I think that I think the overall idea is if you watched this and you related to something here, then I guess we did our job.
And that's what we're hoping. And we'll try to tell more stories.
Yes.